Okay, catch us up with what's going on with Amy Bishop.
That is such a weird story. I'm not sure anyone knows what's going on with Amy Bishop. New things are being revealed every day. I just read a news story that says that they're looking into whether or not she was an academic fraud, and saying that some of her co-publishers on papers were actually her children, and that the laboratory that she referenced as the publisher was actually a residential area that bred Labradors. Okay. I read another story about her coming up to a lady in a restaurant when she wanted the baby seat and it was already taken, and she punched the woman in the head and started screaming, "I am Dr. Amy Bishop." The whole story comes back to something that we've seen time and again, and that is that people are helpless in campus situations, and they are mandated to be defenseless as a result of university policy. And we see it happen time and again. You know, back in 2008, if I can travel back a little bit to give this a little bit of background, the New York Times invited me to participate on a panel, and I guess they figured they were going to stack one little blogger up against 6 people like the head of the Harvard Mental Health Department and the director of Virginia Homeland Security, and that they were going to, you know, just be able to say, well, we were fair because we had 1 pro-gun voice against 6 anti-gun voices. And the bottom line is it didn't quite work out that way, and not because I attribute to myself any particular eloquence, just simply the facts of the matter. You know, a year or so, or about 9 months or so before the Virginia Tech shooting, one of their students wrote a letter that was published in the local paper and said, look, you know, I carry concealed, I've been checked out, and yet I can't do it on campus. And we just had a campus lockdown due to some escaped prisoner, and I can't carry on campus, so I'm defenseless by university policy. And then their spokesperson, a guy by the name of Larry Hinker, wrote a letter in the newspaper a couple days thereafter rebutting it, and he essentially ridiculed this guy. And he said basically it's mind-boggling to see the opinions. He called it out of touch, he called it inane, he called it absurd, and he said that guns don't belong in classrooms, they never will. Virginia Tech has a very sound policy preventing the same. And of course, 9 months later, we saw how sound that policy was. The same thing happened at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. We saw this woman, and at this point, you have to say allegedly, although with all the witnesses and things like that, but you have to say it, she apparently pulled out the gun and methodically started shooting people in the head.
Yeah.
Well,
I understand that was a meeting about her tenure with the school. Is that correct?
That's what I understand it to be, and this is where you get into, you know, the things of academic fraud. The fact that a year before, a group of students had actually filed a petition complaining about her and basically saying, you know, we're talking about, you know, a bizarre individual here, and of course the school administration did nothing about it. And the thing that I find telling about the shooting incident is that I read on another website a eyewitness testimony from one of the professors who was in the room at the time, and he says that at some point she stopped to reload, and they were able to rush her, and they were able to push her out of the room and shut the door and lock the door so that she couldn't get back to them and dial 911. And of course, what you're left with is the fact that now you have students and other faculty now that are at the mercy of a mad dog psychopath who is armed.
That's right.
Now, you know, it's like if you have time to push somebody out the door, you have time to draw a firearm and level it and fire off a few shots. And of course, the other thing that I don't understand is, you know, if somebody is shooting and I can get my hands on them, I don't think I'm going to stop until my elbows are deeply embedded in their lungs. I mean, you know, I just don't see how wrapped up in a situation like that you could stop yourself from doing whatever at all possible to put this person down. And I can understand, and so I guess I can't really judge too much someone who is unarmed pushing someone out the door and then locking the door, but I will give the observation that had that someone been able to stop the person instead of just pushing them out, they would not have been leaving plenty of other defenseless people at the mercy of this person.
Right, and I think you've made a couple of good points there, and I think we should just touch on it for just a minute, David. Number one, you used the word mandated early on in the conversation, and that right there needs to be dealt with. Number two, just for the folks who may not have known it wasn't a classroom situation. This was a meeting held with responsible people in the university who were addressing her tenure and maybe problems surrounding it. Now, it's my understanding they were like 40 minutes into this, okay, before she finally reached in her purse and pulled out a 9mm and began shooting people. The other point I just want to make there is, and you touched on it, was that there had been one other weapon in that room carried by anyone, you could have addressed this situation much quicker. Now, I got to tell you, when somebody's firing a gun, I'm probably not going to run towards them. Now, that's why they were able to probably subdue her and move her after she had emptied that clip and she was reloading. Had there been one other gun in that room, maybe, and we can only guess, of course, someone's life might have been saved or certainly prevented an injury.
Well, what you see is you see the people who are against it saying, well, that's just patently ridiculous, that you can't have things turn into open firefights because a lot more people are going to get hurt and killed. And you know what, when you're in a situation like that, how much worse can you make it? And I have to cede the point that, yes, just because someone in the room may have been armed is not an automatic 100% guarantee that that would have saved the day. Possibly that person could have been one of the first ones hit. Possibly that person could, I mean, you can come up with all kinds of different scenarios, and there is no magic solution, but no one claims that there is a magic solution. What we do claim is that all other things being equal, it is preferable to be able to defend yourself when being attacked than to not be able to defend yourself. That is a simple truism. And in terms of whether it was taking place in an administrative conference room or whether it was taking place in a classroom, the Israelis in their schools have armed teachers that are on guard, and that was very instrumental in stopping a lot of the attacks that were happening over there. Right. And in terms of, well, you can't allow students to be armed, well, most of the places that are CCW issuing states, I believe it's 21 is the minimum age, and then you hear, well, but you have student drinking binges and they're irresponsible. And again, when I was going to college, we could have keggers in the dorm. You can't do that anymore. All the policies say no alcohol on campus. And the bottom line is, what you're really saying is, once you cross this magic imaginary boundary line of the university property, your behavior changes. Because if you can act as a responsible citizen, a responsible armed citizen off campus, what all of a sudden on campus is going to change your behavior to where now all of a sudden you're going to turn into the mad dog or the irresponsible person or the drunken gun-shooting binge drinker. You can do that off campus if you're so inclined, and it goes back to the arguments against liberalized concealed carry laws where they said, well, we're going to have blood on the street over fender benders. We're going to have Dodge City. That does not happen because, again, the type of mind that is a murderous mind is an aberrance. It is not just your average normal person, and it is certainly not your average normal gun owner.
Right. Well, and unless Amy, and there's probably another point here, David. Let me just touch on this for a second, too, because it probably, it takes me to Texas somehow. If Amy had thought for one moment that there had been other people in the room with a gun, that may have changed the picture also. Unless she's suicidal, and of course that could be true too. But if she had known, as you would if you went to places in Texas, anytime you go in there, you never know who's in that room may have a gun. Thank God they do. I'm not criticizing it. But before you perpetuate anything foolish or a crime, you have to be aware that there are other people armed in that room. So the argument which you were just telling us about there for the anti-gunners is absolutely false because it doesn't go that next step.